A good life is a life built around fulfilling work, play, relationships, and lifelong learning. Welcome to Good Life Conversations, where we explore the stories and strategies of inspiring everyday people who are striving to create a life of purpose, meaning, and connection. Hello, and welcome to this Good Life Conversation. My name is Jay. I am your host and the founder of Discover Year, and today's guest is Ian Affleck. Welcome, Ian.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jay.
Ian and I have known each other for quite some time. I would say about 13, 14 years now. We met through mutual friends and way back in probably 2010, 2011, and we've been friends ever since. And Ian is a person in my life who I've learned a lot from around food and food marketing. He is a farmer, he would tell you, from Prince Edward Island, and he works in the agricultural industry, which we'll chat a little bit about. But I've always appreciated Ian's thoughts, perspectives, and lessons learned around food, how it's marketed, what's real and what's not. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So thanks for being here, Ian. The first question we always like to start with is to tell us about a day in the life of Ian. What's typical? What time do you get up? Do you have a morning routine? How many hours do you work? Do you do anything in between? Do you have any wind down routines? What time do you go to bed? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so for me, my daily routine kind of starts with my child. So I have a 10-year-old. So kind of the first thing I do is I get up. Well, I guess before that, I got to walk the dogs, which I really enjoy kind of as a morning routine. You get outside, you get that, especially right now. It's I know we don't want to date the podcast discussion, but it's February. So you get that fresh air first thing in the morning. That's really good to wake me up. Get in, get the kid ready for school, get all the food prepared, make sure he's got what he needs. Then get myself ready, get into work. Start around 9, work till about 5. And that's kind of my focus. Once I get into work, I find the first thing that I do is I sit down and I make a list of what do I want to accomplish today and what do I want to accomplish this week. So then I have broader work plans that go longer, like months in advance, but I look at what do I need to do today and what do I need to do this week. And then once I do the week one, I look back, does what I'm doing today actually help me do what I'm doing this week? Or is it just something I wanted to do today that isn't actually one of my priorities? So that kind of circular logic thing helps me figure out what I really need to do today. And then most of the beginning of my day focuses on my team. So I have a team of 4, all of us working on policy and regulations and science and communication. So making sure that as a vice president, they have what they need to succeed, because if they succeed, I will succeed. That's kind of the number one thing. What almost once you get up to a leadership position here, it's not really about what I do. It's about what I make sure they can do, because if they're doing it, then essentially I will accomplish what I'm looking for. So a big focus on my team. And then, physically most of the days on a computer, on Zoom meetings now in our new world where you're just constant Zoom meetings, trying to manage those, not have too many of them, make them shorter whenever I can. And then, try to be home, leave the office around 5 and get home, and then do my best to stay away from work after that, unless it's an absolute emergency. Really try to separate the work life from the home life. And I will say in the new world, that's a new and unique challenge for me. I used to have no trouble once I walked out the building, work was there. Even when I had, back in the day, BlackBerries or now an iPhone, and I can get my emails, I didn't have trouble not looking at them. Now that my office is part-time in my home, it's much more challenging to separate work and life. I do find that that's a new struggle and something I have to be very attentive on.
Okay. And then you'll probably eat something, and then do you have any activities or hobbies or things that you do in the evening, or are you just wiped out and you pass out?
Yeah, I'm definitely I'm big on 3 good meals. Like, you got to have fuel for the body. That's so critical. And then once I get home, it's kind of, back into the family care routine. And then I'm a little bit more of a night owl than my wife. She has a much better routine and is in bed at she enjoys sleep and is in bed at 9. She's much more well rested than me. I'm a bit more of a night owl to my detriment. This is also a weakness that I have that I'm trying to adjust, because I'll be awake from 9 till 11 or maybe even 12. And I don't really think I do much of value in those hours when I probably should be sleeping so that my morning will be that much more effective. But that's I know that's a weakness of mine, is those kind of wasted hours at night where you're just doom scrolling or staring off into the distance or thinking you're doing work, but it's the most inefficient work you've ever done when you could probably do it in 15 minutes the next morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And I didn't mention this earlier. I forgot to mention, but Ian's formal title at work these days is Vice President of Plant Biotechnology at a company called CropLife Canada, and we'll chat a little bit about that. But um, so this idea of planning, which is not something that every guest has talked about yet. So you get, and the first thing you get to work, you think, what am I doing today? What am I doing this week? Can you tell us about how you developed that? Is that a recent thing? Have you been doing it for a long time?
I think it honestly it ebbs and flows. I think once I do it for like 3 months in a row, it almost becomes unconscious. And then I get really good at being disciplined and focused on my priorities. And then I'll kind of stop doing it. But I actually do it both through my Microsoft Teams, and then at times I'll write it down or I'll literally print it off. So I physically have a to-do list in my hands. I find that very focusing for me.
Mm.
Once I get really good at it, I'll drift away from the habit. And then maybe 3 months later, I'll be like, what am I trying to accomplish? And then I'll be like, why did I stop doing my thing? So it
Mm.
kind of like, as you train yourself to do something, you'll get so good at it, you won't do it anymore. But you got to recognize when you fall out of those habits, and then maybe you need a crutch to pick them back up. So it's something I learned from a previous boss years ago in the government. He always had a physical to-do list, and I just loved the focus that it provided him. So I kind of picked up that from there. It's very focusing, and at the end of the day, you can look back and go, did I succeed in what I set out to do today? And if not, what got in the way? So I find it very useful.
So we have a 40-something-year-old man who is working on, this habit that he's been working on for years, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not, and still aware of the fact that he doesn't go to bed early enough or doesn't think he does, and still working on that, which is great. And this is part of these conversations that people, really successful, intelligent, caring people, and they say, I'm still working on these things. So what is it for you? What do you think is the barrier to going to bed earlier?
I don't know. I think part of it is I enjoy just the silence of the house after 10 o'clock. Like the dogs are sleeping, the child is asleep, get the house to myself. You just feel this moment of calm, but it's not really providing me after 15 minutes of that. What am I really getting from it? I could get a lot more calm if I was just asleep. So I think part of it's just a long-term habit of just being a little bit up later at night and just trying to break that cycle. Because when you go to bed early, I wake up in the morning feeling so much more prepared for the day. So I kind of ebb and flow out of that cycle as well. You get better at it, you get worse. I also find that I then, if I'm up past 10, I'll snack at night. And they're typically not healthy snacks. So it's also a personal health thing. Is like one way to not eat things I shouldn't is just go to bed. Don't be awake, and I won't get into that bag of Cheetos that's sitting in the counter.
Nice. I connect to that a lot. So I'm taking this away as a reminder for myself too.
I have a major weakness for cereal. Oh man. Cereal when no one's watching is even worse, right? Like there's no one to judge you when everyone's asleep.
Yeah. Yeah. And a normal amount of cereal just isn't enough. I don't know
No,
your
it's not.
experience. Yeah.
I,
Speaking
I
of
I
cereal,
enjoy that joke of like when you read the back of a bag of potato chips and it's like serving size is like 22 chips. It's like I eat 22 chips standing in front of the cupboard deciding if I'm going to have any chips. So there's food marketing. Serving
yes.
size is a clever element of food marketing.
Yeah. Well, and that's that brings us into, in perhaps in a roundabout way for our guests, for our listeners, this connects to your world of work. So, and maybe before we dive into what you do at CropLife, we can swing back a little bit to early days. So I mentioned you're a farmer. You grew up on a farm in PEI, and you have now landed in the food industry, the agricultural industry, but you've done a few things along the way. So, can you just tell us a little bit about your interest in food in general? What drew you to that industry and career?
Yeah, and it's been a diverse journey. I started on the farm. I had every intention of going back to continue the farm. So I enrolled in university at the same ag college my dad went to. Didn't apply anywhere else. I just like dad went there, I'll go there too. Went for ag economics so I could do a better job of running the books on the farm. Did one semester of ag economics, realized although I was getting great marks, I didn't enjoy it. Switched into the sciences, to which my marks were terrible. So much so that the professor who ran that department saw me in the hallway after first semester and said, "I saw you switch majors. Do you remember what I gave you in biology 101?" I'm like, "Yeah, but it was so cool." So I flipped into a harder space where I wasn't as good, but I loved it more. That carried me on this science journey, finished my bachelor's, did my master's in Guelph. And really honestly did my master's because I just wasn't sure where I wanted to work yet. I didn't know if I wanted to go to the farm. I didn't know if I wanted to try something else. Do I want to do research? So I was like, well, while I'm trying to figure it out, I might as well continue to add tools to the toolbox. So let's stay in school. And school was also fun. So that wasn't a hard part to make that decision. Finished my master's. All my friends went to Ottawa, a bunch of them from my master's working at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So I followed them there on a 1 year term, and then I've never left. I was at CFIA for 10 years as a regulator, federal regulator, making sure food was safe, and then spent the last 10 years now in the private sector where I loved doing that. But I kind of wanted a more dynamic space where I could get involved in changes in the sector more. So I left the government to come out into the private sector and work here. So it's kind of my intentions were very different at the beginning. And then I just kind of meandered through as my interest changed into different spaces.
Very cool. Yeah. So you always had the idea of the agricultural sector in mind, but didn't really know where you fell within that. And I'd love to return to this idea where you said, "Hey, I was doing really well, but not enjoying agricultural economics, but I was really excited about science and bad at them." So there's a couple questions I'd love to explore there because this is somewhat counterintuitive to people, perhaps, but it does a good job of demonstrating that what we're good at is not always the only answer in terms of what we should pursue. So first question is, did you end up getting better at science? Did you improve?
I got somewhat better. I think, and I like, being tested is different than what you can do. I think also I always subscribe to that. I don't test well, but I understood the concepts and I just loved the subject matter. I love the philosophy behind science and the approach. So, going from like high 80s and 90s in the economics program to mid 60s and, recovered from that. And by the time I graduated in my last year, I was getting 80s and 90s in science. But my overall average coming to university was like a low 70, which wouldn't qualify me for really, I wasn't going to get selected for any master's programs. Like that wasn't going to happen, not with a 72. You're at the bottom of the pile on the desk of thousands of applications. So what I did there is I wrote personal letters to about 30 professors across the country saying like I'm passionate about agriculture. I'm a farm kid. Like I switched into this because I really want to do more of this. Do you have any room for me in your program? And three of the 30 wrote me back, and one of them took me on. So it was kind of like you just waiting for the world to just work out wasn't going to happen. I had to like grind it out and kind of force myself into the space, and it worked out. But I'm really happy I did because I to this day like science is my passion. So I'm glad that I took that on, and I think the fact that it was harder made me have to get into it more. I had to work a
Mhm.
little bit harder for it. It didn't come naturally right off the bat.
Very cool. Yeah. So you were passionate about it, but not innately strong or skilled, but you improved. And is it safe to say that the way you've applied what you learned is perhaps different than some of your classmates in your master's? I would imagine that some of them would be the ones in the lab doing the work, and that's not been your path. So was that intentional?
Yeah, and I had some early professors, had really great professors at my university, and they were like, "Don't let your degree pigeonhole you into what you think you're going to do. You're a plant biologist. That doesn't mean you have a degree in plant biology or agronomy. That doesn't mean you have to be a plant biologist or an agronomist. You can apply that knowledge to anything you want." So they kind of, just because you get a chemistry degree doesn't mean you're a chemist. Just because you have a business degree doesn't mean you have to go into that business. You could have some other entrepreneurial thing that you're just going to do better because you understand business. So I think not getting pigeonholed by your education, look at it like a tool in the toolbox that you will take out alongside your passions and alongside your life experience in order to create a set of skills that'll be useful either in your own business or someone else's. So you're not defined by your education. It's just one element of you when you pitch yourself into a job.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. We talk quite a bit about that at Discover Year and in our broader conversations as well with people. People do have this belief in today's world, much more so than, when you and I went to university, that you do a degree and that's what you're gonna do forever. You're gonna apply that. And if you don't apply those specific skills and subject matter, it's somehow a failure, which is mind-boggling to those of us who went to school at a different time. But I'm happy to hear you share that message. And if we could
And
just
and I
return.
hope I hope to that point, if people hear that, it can reduce the stress of choosing what you want to add to your toolbox. Like whether it's a diploma program or a 6-month program or something, like just add tools. Just keep adding tools, and then you'll find a place to use them.
Yeah, agreed. And speaking of adding tools, well, let's return to, because I've known this story for a while. We've chatted about it before. This idea where you had pretty average grades, pretty poor grades, let's say, in terms of master's
That's not good.
acceptances.
Okay. All right. All right.
It's all about perspective, but
Yeah,
perhaps not typical grades to get you into a
exactly.
master's program.
Yeah.
And then you wrote letters to 30 professors. You took the time to figure out who those relevant professors were. You found their addresses, you wrote them letters, you sent them out. Three of them got back to you, 10%, and one of them accepted you. First of all, how did you think to do that?
I think back to how I got there, and I'm not exactly sure how I came to that. I think it was through working with my professors at the university. I had heard of other professors in that field from other universities. Like I'd heard my professor talk about the guy he knows at McGill and the lady he knows at Guelph that are working on similar subjects. And then that got me thinking, is like, okay, so there's programs across the country in all these different universities. Who's running them? And I don't want to just be a random piece of paper in a pile. I need to stand out. And especially because my paper is not going to be, it's not going to stand out on its own because of my marks. So how do my marks are not the most valuable tool in my toolbox. It was my experience and my passion and my ability to describe that to someone. So how do I put that on display? So that was, and then this is like 2002, right? This is like early internet here where it's not easy to find information. It's, you know, email was different back then and just the access to the ability to move things around, but you just spent the time grinding it out, finding all these different names and sending off letters. And it'd be interesting to know how many of the letters never got to anyone, how many of the emails went to the wrong email address, or those professors weren't actually the people I thought they were and had nothing to do with agriculture, right? Like how many of those would have been a complete waste of time? I'll never know.
Yeah.
But it was that idea that the general thing, and this is kind of advice that my father gave me when I was a kid, and I think I lived it through this, is like you can do everything right and life still might not hand you the win. And where that comes from in farming is you can do everything right, plant on the right day, use the right fertilizer, pick the right seed, and it just may not rain.
Mm.
And there ain't nothing you can do about that except get up the next morning and keep farming because you don't have a choice. Like you can't force it to rain. You can only prepare yourself to take advantage of the rain when it comes. And I have kind of apply that through life. It's like just keep grinding it out. And if it doesn't work, you do it again, or you shift and do something else and try that just as hard. But sometimes it doesn't rain. There's an agricultural takeaway.
Yeah.
Sometimes the rain doesn't come.
It's a nice analogy. Yeah. I mean, I think what's most interesting to me in all of this is your personal anecdote, your story that supports a lot of research in psychology, that having an interest in something is the most important factor for success, because when we have that interest, it helps us be more motivated, more resourceful, more persistent. So we talk in Discovery about something we call polite persistence, which is what you in fact did when writing those 30 letters. When you wrote them out, when you sent them out, did you have any expectations or hope as to how many people would write you back?
I
Or
had no idea what was going to come of that. I really had no clue. I really didn't. And I had gone through the formal application process for all those universities as well.
Hmm,
So like I was in the main hopper, but this was literally a shot in the dark of going, at least I can say I tried all the things that I can think of. Um, yeah, I really don't know what my expectations were.
that's great. Yeah, just
Yeah.
trying because you just wanted to make it happen and you were willing to make the effort because it was exciting enough to you.
Yeah, and that was, and then balancing, and I think the other side of that is like you want to do something you're passionate about because it adds that desire to not be discouraged by failure. And like my marks were in a way a failure, but I wasn't discouraged by them. I just kept trying to make them better. right? It wasn't like, oh, I should just go off and do something that's easier. It's like, no, I want to do this. I just got to try harder. I got to do more. Um, but that's the balance. It was like of balancing something. There's probably things I love even more than science. I would have loved to be a musician, played piano and drums all my childhood. I absolutely loved music, but I had to go like, what's the real am I had to look at my own capabilities and go, am I really going to make it as a musician? I would have loved to try, but I had to balance. I also, I like music this much, but I like science here. And this is a much better opportunity to work out for
Mm.
me. So I'm going to put my efforts in here and I'll keep music on the side, right? Like I'll keep that. You talk about hobbies and passions, right? Like I love music. I DJ'd through university because I love to play music. And then, um, and I'm a very outdoorsy person. So there's kind of what I keep on the side to keep myself very occupied with other things I love that I'm not doing as a career.
Yeah. That's great too, because we talk a lot in the program. One of the things that is, I think, unfortunate is there are a lot of myths around the idea of passion, having a singular passion in life. Follow your passion. That's a message that a lot of young people hear, which is, depending on how you interpret it, could be useful or could be very harmful. And there's some research that shows that sometimes it could be debilitating to think of life as having one passion and career. So you're saying I have multiple
Mm.
passions, and there was some process mentally that you you use, whether conscious or unconscious, where you said, okay, well, here's the things I love. What's more practical? How can I balance these things? Was that as conscious as it sounds right now?
I don't think it was in retrospect. I can see how I came up with that. I don't think I thought about it that hard. I did have that option. It's funny enough, coming out of my undergrad in Truro, where the I was DJing, and the local bar was like, "We'll pay you to be a full-time DJ if you just stay in Truro and don't go do your masters." And the money wasn't great because it's like bar work, but man, that was so much fun.
Mm,
Like it was the best. And I just had to go like, but where is that going to go? Right? Like this will be great for 3 or 4 years, but then where am I going to take that? So I was like, I'm going to have to let that go and I'll do it through I became a wedding DJ in Guelph, Ontario on the side while I was doing my master's. So I could play with my music passion, but focus on my education. But yeah, there was some just realism there of going like, which one am I going to throw my lot into? And I'd say what my singular passion is to be happy and content. And
mm,
then everything I do is just bits and pieces of delivering that passion, right? Like, and for me to be happy and content, I want my family to be happy and content. I want my job to provide me with a level of satisfaction. I want my hobbies to be available to me. So I don't get overly focused on one thing. It's kind of like my happiness and contentment is my focus, and then all my world around that has to fit into that. And it's not like a selfish thing, but it's like ensuring that my family being happy and content and the people around me and my friends are happy and content is part of my
mm,
happiness and contentness.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to think of it, is this kind of, even though we use the term work-life balance a lot in today's world, it's this balance of, and I think you are a really great critical thinker. We've talked about this a lot, and you and I think, both believe that there's perhaps not enough emphasis on critical thinking and reasoning in the education system today, or at least I know I feel that way. And I think you, in the examples that you share with people, are illustrations in the agricultural world of how there's perhaps not enough critical thinking going on for people. But it sounds like this was a useful process for you to think about all the things that are important in life. And that's a great message that I think we should be sharing more, is that, hey, think about all the things that bring you joy and satisfaction, or that cause you pain, and learn how to uh, fit them in your life.
Yeah, that's how I've found contentment is the aggregate of everything I'm doing. Does it provide me with what I'm looking for? Trying to find it all through a singular outlet, I think is very challenging if you're not like Michael Jordan or someone who's like, extraordinary in a certain space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy, especially so. And the Michael Jordan example is great, because here's a person who, as you dig into him, loves golf. As an example, the more you read about Michael Jordan, the more you'll hear that loves golf, tried baseball. So, and of course, there's
Yeah.
things beyond sports. So I think it's the message that I interpret here is that, people that we see in social media or celebrities, it seems like that's all they're doing, and the truth is that's almost never the case. Almost never the case. So I appreciate that. Um, So yeah, while we're on the topic of hobbies, I'm curious just to know because this is one of the questions we like to explore. So you love music. Are you still playing music? Are you still DJing? Any of that? What else do you do for hobbies?
Sadly, no. I'm like not. I listen to a lot of music. Like there's not a lot of time where I'm not listening to music. I still enjoy. I get immersed in music, so I get my joy out of listening to other people's music and appreciating it. I think is how I do it now. I'm interested as my son gets older. Can I find time to get back to the piano and get lessons? I think it's all still in here. I just have to like unlock it again because my parents told me I would regret quitting when I was 17, and I said they were wrong. They were right. I regret it. Every time I go to somewhere and there's a piano in the corner, I'm like, oh, why can't I sit down at that?
Hmm.
So as I get older and more time frees up, I'm excited about that part of getting older, of having more time back in my schedule to kind of focus on those hobbies
Yeah.
uh, as I keep going.
Very cool. Anything else? So I heard, you like walking the dog in the mornings and then you
Yeah.
listen to music. Any other hobbies that are interesting to you?
I'd say so we're fortunate enough, my wife and I have a cottage about an hour and a half from here, and that's basically we're there every weekend. Like outdoors, walking in the snow, out on the lake, like whatever it is, like just being outside is one of our favorite things when we're in town, walk the dogs out in the middle of nowhere, that kind of thing. So just
Hmm.
being outside and disconnecting from the house, the electronics, the phones, just being with yourself is a wonderful thing. I
Hmm.
think something that I noticed through the pandemic is I listened to an enormous amount of podcasts through the pandemic. There wasn't a moment where I didn't have an ear pod in my ear. So I think I overdid it. And then I've gone back to like I need to spend some time with myself.
Hmm.
Like walk the dog without a podcast in your ear and actually look at what you're thinking about and be alone with your own thoughts for a minute, which I hadn't been for like 2 years. And I think that's important too. You don't want to be oversaturated with content. You need some time to attend to the content in your own head.
Yeah, the irony of this time where, globally we were isolated and not doing a lot of our normal behaviors and interactions in a human way. And yet I suspect that your experience was similar. People were trying to find things to occupy their times, but they were their thoughts and their days, but they were, yeah, perhaps it was too extreme, or they were not ultimately as satisfying as time in nature or time with people we love. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think where it clicked with me is I was washing dishes one day during the pandemic and I had my earbuds in and probably just to block out what was going on in the house because we've been locked in our house for so long. And then it kind of hit me and I was like, before you could do this, you would just have to think about things when you wash the dishes. And now I'm not thinking about anything other than what someone else is talking about. I'm not having any original thoughts. Like I'm not thinking about me or my situation or what makes me happy. I'm just like absorbing other. So that was like, it was this moment when I was washing dishes where I was like, this used to be a time of reflection.
Yeah,
And I probably need some more of that time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, because I think for me, one thing that I appreciated with the books I read, the podcasts or the books on tape, is that the ones that I find most meaningful are the ones where I'll usually have to pause it or stop it because it conjures up my own thoughts. And, perhaps young people haven't thought or played around enough with, what's the stuff you read to simply be out of your own mind? What's the
Yeah.
stuff that you read or listen to help you process your own thoughts? And there are all different ways that we can interact with these things, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So what I would love to hear about is, a little bit about your career and specifically within this realm. You can tell us a little bit if you don't mind about what CropLife Canada does. And I'd also love for you to share some examples of myths that exist in the food
Mm.
industry that people might ingest thinking they are hearing truths when in fact they're hearing marketing.
Yeah. Okay. This is the passion that I'm in now, right? This is what I like working on. So I work for a company called CropLife Canada, and in any sector of any industry, not just food or agriculture, when you have a bunch of businesses who all do the same kind of thing, they often will have the same challenges because they all work in the same space, whether it's automotive or agriculture or the manufacturing sector. So they'll form a trade association. So they'll all pay dues into a company, and that company will represent them to consumers, to the public, to the government on issues that cut across that industry. So I work in one of these for the agricultural sector. So I work in Ottawa. I spend a lot of my time with the government talking about the most recent scientific advancements, what the regulations should be to make sure those advancements are safe, to make sure that there's a pathway for companies to bring new products to the market. Because if you can't figure out what safety and regulatory hoops you have to jump through, you won't bring products here because it's too risky because you don't understand. It's like a house builder couldn't build a house in Ottawa if it didn't know what Ottawa's rules were for building houses. It'd be too risky to pour the foundation because someone may roll in and go, no, you can't do that. And it's like, well, I didn't know. You didn't have it written down anywhere. Or had you seen that we've invented new concrete that totally solves the reason why you have this old rule? So that's kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis, is kind of rules and communication. But a big part of that is we bring a lot of new innovations into the space. So our companies will often say they're scientific solutions providers. So if farmers have problems, we try to find scientific solutions for those problems. It could be improved seeds, could be biologicals, it could be organic compounds, it could be synthetic compounds, you name it. Could be drones, weather data, AI, tractors. Like, if we can invent something to solve the problem, and then that's what we're going to do, and we're going to sell it to the farmer. So with that, when you're bringing in new innovations, comes why should I be comfortable with change, right? The person on the other end, the consumer, is going, you're changing the way you do things, sure, but why should I be okay with the changes you're making? I think you can think about it in any space. If anyone's followed, like, as 5G comes in, it's like, 5G and the radio towers are spying on us, and the radio waves give us brain cancer. And it's like there's all kinds of, any new technology comes with a concern. So in order to reach the consumer, you have to explain, why did you invent it? What's, first off and foremost, what's the benefit for the consumer? Now, this is the challenge. We didn't invent it for the consumer. We invented it for the farmer, typically. But you got to explain why the consumer should care that you invented it for the farmer, in order for them, before they'll be willing to consider whether it's safe, unsafe, the risks are acceptable or not. They need to understand that there's a reason why they should accept it. So we spend a lot of time talking about this stuff. And with it, into the food space, as you talk about marketing, comes with what marketing in any space is trying to do is convince you that that's the product you want. And you're busy, you're moving quickly. We all don't have a lot of time to make purchase choices on anything, especially food. So marketing can prey on the idea that you don't have much time to make your decision. So it's a lot of posturing and appearances to make you feel comfortable with that purchase over a product that's a competitor. The baseline thing to remember in food, all food is safe or it wouldn't be on the shelf. Nutritional value can vary because that is up to the product, but safety is across the board. All food on the shelf is safe. So
in
everything
Canada.
in Canada, yeah. In North America, we live in a very privileged society with an insanely safe food system, where, like, our instances, and you'll see outbreaks of listeria and lettuce and things like that. It does happen. But our outbreaks of foodborne illness are so minute considering the amount of people we feed on a daily basis. It's like the envy of the world. Some European countries approach our level of safety, but we're right at the top. We're like in the top 1% of countries when it comes to food safety. It's incredible. But then that means you have a ton of food, a ton of selection, and how do brands stand out? So what we see, one of the biggest trends is what we call absence labeling. So you'll notice that there's more and more little stickers on your food all the time. No preservatives, no red 42, no added sugar, no cholesterol, no this, no that. And what it's doing is that you shop from about 4 feet away, and it's not really assuming you're going to read any of them. It's that product appears to have more value because it has more stickers. That's the subliminal mental marketing that's going on. A minute portion of the consumer base will be looking for a label, like 1 to 2%, maybe 5% of consumers will look for any specific label because that's important to something they're living by. But most people, it's just they're racing down that aisle. They're looking for a value proposition. I can't taste it. I don't know what the quality's like. So I just got to go by the label. And you grab it, you throw it in the cart. So with that absence labeling comes the problem of, and this started, I remember this in potatoes, grew up on a potato farm. McCain's was one of the first that did it, and they put no cholesterol on the bag of French fries. Well, potatoes they can't have cholesterol. They don't have cholesterol. So you're saying it doesn't have something it couldn't have. in order to appear that you've added value to the bag by removing something you don't want. So you'll see this all the time.
Mm.
And it's like no added sugar, but it's got like 7 real tablespoons of strawberries. Well, of course, there's no added sugar. You have a lot of sugar in there. It's with strawberries. Or my favorite is like non-GMO table salt. Well, there's no DNA in table salt, so it couldn't, there's no physical way for that to be a GMO. But it's very easy to put the non-GMO sticker on because you don't have to audit it to make sure that it isn't. So like this is what's going on in marketing. It's not about selling you what the product is anymore. It's about selling you what the product isn't, because it implies you should avoid something that likely wasn't there anyway, or that sounds like it
Mm.
has value. And this is the most, and you see it in not just in food. Absence labeling happens in all spaces. It's like this T-shirt's not made with this and not made with that, or it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. It's like, well, half of those claims it likely couldn't or never did. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the
Absence labeling.
absence labeling is the most the most prevalent thing. However, this is what's really interesting when you poll consumers. You say, what do you purchase on? And they will say environmental footprint, the fair trade, donations back to planting trees. But then you follow those consumers to the grocery store. Number one is price. Number two is quality. And then like with a massive gap down the list is anything else.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, the food is safe and it's good. So you're shopping on a limited budget with limited time, and you're looking for price and quality. So people will give you one answer because they think that's what they're supposed to say. But when at the end of the day, they're balancing on price and quality. That's what really matters. All the rest of it is all of this virtue signaling that's on labels, all of this absence labeling is really about catering to about 5% of the market who has individual things they're looking for. Everything else is just
Social desirability is the term that is often used in research studies to decipher what people think they need to say and how we somehow need to follow them around the grocery store to find the truth. So that's an interesting phrase that, for our students that haven't kind of dug into
yeah. Oh,
research.
it's so true in the food space. And I think it's also this is something I learned from some food marketers explaining to me, is like I'll see a really prevalent label that's gotten like taken off. It's on like the non-GMO label, for example, is on like 80,000 different products across the food space. And they said like that. So people view that as like, man, a lot of people want that label. And they said about 4% of people look for that label.
Yeah.
I was like, well, why do they put it on everything? It's because that's the 4% of people that don't just go for price and quality. So they are a winnable segment.
Hmm.
So give the general impression of value, because that plays into price, and then go after the movable 4 to 5% who will jump products based on your claims.
Yeah.
And you talked about critical thinking, and this is where, because we're busy when we do food purchasing, we're the marketing's kind of preying on the fact that you don't have time to do the critical thinking, because you don't. You want to be
Mhm.
somewhere other than the grocery store.
And I'd love really quickly, because we don't have that much time left, but really quickly, correct me if I'm wrong, but so your organization represents some of the GMOs, some of the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
multinational companies. It's all about the science, improving the food, doing it in smaller spaces in a more sustainable way. And what I think is interesting, which I know very little about in this space, but you have helped me, is there's a lot of people out there who are strictly organic, or they have this belief that anything that's not organic, or farm to table, that concept, which is prevalent these days. So I know you live in this world, and maybe real succinctly, just as a
Yeah.
teaser, could you make the real quick argument for why this idea of everything being organic and farm to table, why is that not necessarily the way?
It's not the only way. Like, I think that's the thing, is like everything has its place and its moment. Everything is a tool in the toolbox. But really, it's all marketing. Like, there's just food production.
Mm.
And that like, as an agriculturalist, all these subdivisions of food, organic or biodynamic or local, like there's just growing food, and there's a bunch of different ways you can apply to do that in the region and what makes sense for you. If you live near a major population center, grow for the local market because you have a local market to sell it to. If you live in Peace River Valley, Alberta, you can't grow local because no one lives there.
Mm,
Like you're growing 15% of the food grown in Canada, yet no one lives 400 miles near where you grow it. So you can't do local. So it's not to demonize anything. It's to go, there's great practices in organic, there's great technologies coming out of science. Local can be good, but when it gets down to marketing, it's about marketing that this is the only way, and this is the only way, and this is the only way. And that's just not the case. We have to look at every agricultural practice, take the best pieces of them. And that's what farmers do on a daily basis. They'll grow a little bit of organic over there to capture that market. They'll be growing some local boxes to go over here. And then the majority of their operation will be producing food for the masses. And we export 85% of our food in Canada to the rest of the world.
mm.
So
Wow.
we have an obligation to feed the rest of the world who don't have the privilege of buying local because they cannot grow enough food to feed
Mm,
themselves in the country that they're in currently. But this is where technology comes in. Because if you can get the technology into the hands of those countries who can't grow their own food, maybe they can.
hmm.
So it's all just tools on the table. Everything after that is marketing.
Great. What I take away from this as the typical consumer is it's complicated, and this is what I
Oh,
always take away from our conversations. It's complicated, and then my invitation to people is to think critically about the information that's in front of them. So thank you. And I suspect perhaps our students will have some questions, and I would invite them all to test Ian because he's very knowledgeable and honest about what's really going on in the agricultural sector.
yeah.
So we got a couple minutes left, and I'd love to like really rapid fire just some teasers here, even for our audience. One of them, we've talked about some of our typical questions in a roundabout way already, but what is a lesson that you have learned about relationships?
About relationships, I think there's nothing more important to your happiness and your success than healthy relationships. And even trying to maintain healthy relationships with people who aren't trying to maintain them with you. And that doesn't mean being walked on, that doesn't mean like submitting to people, but it's not worth your time putting the same negative energy back toward a negative relationship, and it's immensely worth your time to double down on positive relationships. And I think that comes, I feel big about that in my career. Like my marks weren't the best. I'm sure there's people out there that are way smarter than me, but the attitude you bring with the toolbox that you have is the key. It's not about, you don't have to be the 100% the best person for the job. You got to be a really well suited person for the job, but also bring an attitude and an approach to your work that brings your team up, that you can create relationships with your team, and that synergy makes you all play better. We could come up with a dozen sports analogies for that, it's about how you make your team better. It's not just about how you function on your own. And I think that's all about relationships.
Mhm. And so what I'm hearing is for you that the attitude that you bring, whether it's relationships at work or in your personal life, the attitude is really important to nurture those relationships and to find out what are the most meaningful relationships for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's to treat especially as you go through your career, treating everyone with respect, no matter at what level of that industry they're working in. And it's like you'll just have a more enjoyable time if you find a way to connect with every level of every person. That just makes it more fun. You just feel more integrated into your companies, into your work. Yeah, find a way to connect with your colleagues.
Nice. Another question that we like to ask is where is the favorite place that you've traveled and quickly
Mm.
tell us why.
Hmm. I guess so. That's to tie there, and this sounds like I'm just so I can say both places. But one is East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda was probably the most incredible trip that I've taken. But also Galapagos, gone snorkeling around the Galapagos, which is amazing. But Africa just blew my mind. It also was a major like first world reset for me about what it's like to live in North America with the abundance of choice and food and et cetera that we have here versus what it's like in other countries that just don't have the level of development that we have been fortunate enough to have. That really, especially in my agricultural journey, just kind of like shocked me back to reality a little bit. I think that cultural education of travel is something you just can't get from watching a documentary. You got to see it.
Yeah, it sounds cliched sometimes. I think about it, but I worked on cruise ships and traveled to all kinds of places. And one of my most clear and important memories was how happy, satisfied, fulfilled people were. The kind of the demarcation of people living in poverty, and how satisfied and happy they look compared to the people who are living here back here in Canada that I came across each day. So I see that, and that's an important. It comes in the research these days as well. You know, even though we have more material wealth than ever before, people generally speaking are much less happy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, we
thank you.
we talked about that really shortly, and I think that's where I have a sympathy for folks coming up through the careers and life these days. Is in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have access to the level of information and the curated experiences of how everybody's success story is just perfect and to the moon. We never saw any of that. We didn't know that. We just knew that life's hard. Sometimes it doesn't rain. You just keep on going. But now being faced with all these like meteoric success stories that are curated example, it isn't really what happened, but it's how they present it. That would be an intense amount of information to process as you go through the struggles of your life. So I never had that. But on the flip side of it, you have access to networks of people. You can access people with a level of ease. Like I could get to those professors today so much easier than I did before. So much easier. But it comes with that other side of it, right? It's like when the tidal wave of information you have access to can also just wash over you. And it's a lot. That's
Yeah.
it's a lot for people to manage. And I don't know how to give advice about it because I didn't live it.
Yeah, it is a thing though, yeah, that we have chatted about, you and I, and then and I've chatted about with a lot of people, but young people today who grew up with smartphones from a very early age have never experienced. So people like you and I did at least experience the world pre-smartphone, so we can make some comparison, whereas young people today often cannot, and that makes it more difficult for them to strive to put their phone away or to get into nature because they haven't yet quite had as many opportunities to experience the benefits of that. So we're always working to try to help students do that more, at least
Yeah.
at Discover Year. Okay, thank you. Last question to wrap up here, which is always our the same last question. This is Good Life Conversations. The point is that, as you alluded to earlier, it's never going to be one job, one relationship, one thing that you do that will be all encompassing and bring you fulfillment in life. It's a whole host of things. So, for a group of young people listening in today who are striving to create a good life for themselves, what advice would you offer them?
Don't give up. I think that's the key thing. Like there's going to be adversity. You want adversity. You otherwise you won't feel fulfilled without it, I don't think. And I'll just harken back to that. Like sometimes it won't rain, but you got to get up and put the crops back in and try again. Like it's just that's what life really is try again, and don't let that beat you down too much. I don't know. I think that's my biggest take home. I think that's what I'm trying to tell my son who's 10
Yeah.
now is the same thing. Just keep trying. That's the key.
And if you're going to send one letter, might as well send 30.
You might as well send 30. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for your time. I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for everyone who's listening. This has been another Good Life Conversation. We hope to see you at the next one.